Thank you so much for the introduction. I wish we did make very good friends. Unfortunately, it was just a fleeting encounter. But I am super excited to talk to everybody today about design with mental health in mind. And before we do dig in, I would like to just give you a little bit of a background on myself, just so you sort of know who's talking to you a little bit more as well. So my name is Gabr-Ryn, as was mentioned, and I'm a product designer at Facebook. I currently work on the community integrity team designing integrity experiences. And our entire mission is essentially to reduce negative experiences that occur across the Facebook family of apps. But before joining Facebook, I actually founded a small design studio here in London where we focused exclusively on products in the mental health space. We worked on everything from suicide prevention systems for the rural United States through to resiliency experiences for families with young children. And I've been fortunate enough to work in this incredible space, but I would like to flag a couple things. That one, I am by no means an expert in mental health. And two, I would really love for today to be an open forum. I'm not here to give all of the answers, but I would really love to contribute to the conversation. And so with that in mind, hopefully I'll be holding a few minutes at the end of this slot for any sort of discussions or sort of comments. And before we go any further into the talk, I'd like to just break apart a little bit how I think about the terms mental health and mental illness. They're often used as synonyms, but there are some pretty important differences. So mental health is something that we all have. Just like our physical health, our mental health can be nurtured and improved, or it can be neglected and tarnished. It's similar to our emotional health or our mental well-being, and it really relates to our emotions, our thoughts, feelings, focus, social lives, and even how we deal with stress and pressure. Mental illness, on the other hand, has a massive impact on our mental health, but it affects the way that people think, feel, behave, and interact with others. Mental illness is a really broad term that refers to a wide range of conditions with varying impacts and manifestation of symptoms, things such as eating disorders, anxiety, or depression. Our mental health, similar to our physical health, really shouldn't be seen as a binary switch. For example, it's not healthy and unhealthy, but rather a spectrum that can move on a daily basis. And just as somebody can have poor physical health without having a serious illness, you can have poor mental health without having a mental illness. And so with that in mind, when I say design for mental health, what I really mean is actually design for everyone. So just yesterday, I was talking to my friend Anna, and she brought up a really interesting point. Since the dawn of the information era, our society has really quantum leaped ahead. I mean, if we look back even 50 years, to see a relative on the other side of the globe, I'd probably have to fly if I was lucky, or take a boat if I was a little bit less lucky. But now we can just FaceTime, and I can see anyone around the world in an instant. I mean, take how I'm talking here today, for example. But when we compare that to evolutionary terms, we really haven't moved forwards an inch. And so to some extent, it's like we're all trying to play a Blu-ray DVD in a Betamax. And that's not to say that technology is bad for us. Of course not. It's incredible, and it's opened up so much opportunity, and it really has brought the world closer together. However, I believe the way in which we interact with technology is somewhat flawed right from the outset. And to understand why, we really have to look at the industry as a whole. So just last year, the World Health Organization actually included gaming disorder, or the inability to stop gaming, into the International Classification of Diseases. And although this is one piece of a growing recognition of the problem, many people aren't aware of exactly how products and games make use of experiences, mechanisms, and prompts to keep us hooked. You see, at their core, digital products make use of several kind of core mechanics to help drive engagement and growth. These include things like creating scarcity, so this idea of inducing a severe sense of FOMO, or fear of missing out. Social proof. So if 200,000 people retweeted that, I should probably take a look too, right? And personalization. So algorithms are always going to bring the most relevant content to the top, because that's what creates the best experience. but it's also what makes it hard to step away. And it is always done with the best intentions, creating the best experience possible. But when you make an experience too good, that's also what makes it harder to step away from the product. And none of these things that I've mentioned are inherently bad, just as nobody could argue that chocolate is inherently bad. The problem, just like with chocolate, lies in overconsumption. So a way to think of it is almost like having a small child. This is me and my youngest brother, Oscar. He just turned 5, and whenever I visit him, he will do his absolute best to capture and maintain my attention. And if my focus switches for even a minute, he's dragging me off to play Octonauts or throwing something at my head, but it's manageable. And I really enjoy the time that I spend from him. I'm getting real value from it. But if we were, for example, to have, say, 20 of him, all fighting for my attention at once, suddenly becomes just a little bit trickier. Not only is the situation harder to manage, but I'm getting less and less value from it. And with more pulls for my attention, it's generating more and more anxiety. And that's a situation that we're often faced with tech. Although it might not feel quite as extreme as a 5-year-old shouting at you, the reality is that many of us are beginning to be pulled for attention just like that. So the journalist Johann Hari has an incredible quote in his book, Lost Connections, about this, where he essentially likens our online presence to taking cocaine. You see, apps, games, experiences, they're not really introducing anything new. What they're doing is actually bringing native human desires into an intensified and easily accessible format. So when we jump onto the computer to play World of Warcraft, we're replacing the tribe that we once had with an online tribe, sometimes with up to 100 people or more. And we go from a single person sat in our bedrooms to hotwiring our desire for connection and tribal status. And we're off fighting dragons, taking down obstacles, discovering treasure with our friends, and it feels really, really great right up until the moment that we step away, and it's back to just us again. You see, we have this intense peak where all of our needs are being met in such a huge way, but then it's followed by a huge crash, which inevitably leaves us wanting more. And this happens to the point where our regular means of connection fail to provide that same high. So we seek more experiences, creating more pools for attention, until it gets to the point that we're living an unempowered and reactive life. And when you put it like this, it's really not that hard to see why problems could start to develop. The good news, however, is that the industry is maturing and we are seeing change. We're becoming more and more aware of the dangers of addictive technology, especially as we see the digital native generation grow up. And it's now starting to enter the conversation more and more, with even big companies beginning to recognize this and make significant changes. But as the people working on these products, I feel that we have the responsibility to really drive this change and to really be the voice for mindful design in our work. So the idea of designing experiences with mental health in mind is honestly relatively easy once you know how. There are some basic principles that can apply to almost every company or product in one way or another, and a million more that are product or industry specific. I'm going to be focusing primarily on the former today, and my number one goal is to give everybody in this room or Zoom something practical to walk away with that can be introduced from the get-go. And so with that in mind, I'm going to walk through the top sort of 5 things to bear in mind when we start to think about this space. And in true tradition, I am going to start with the hardest thing first. And that's actually introducing mental health as a thing. So emotions in the workplace can sometimes be considered a bit of a taboo subject. For a lot of environments, it's almost expected that while we're in the office, we should actually disconnect from our emotional selves and function only with our analytical side. And that's an issue in itself, because that's not how humans work. But then if we consider, if we're unable to connect with our own emotional health, is having empathy for other people's emotional state really all that feasible? It's actually only through making it a talked about topic that we allow it to have a real seat at the table when we start discussing design and product decisions. How do we do this though? It seems like such an abstract concept. And honestly, one way that I've found has worked really well in the past is by talking about your own experiences and sharing your own feelings. I was at a design dinner in Amsterdam a couple of years ago for another conference. And this was when I was still running the studio course. And somebody asked me, hey, why did you get into the mental health space? And for me, that's something I'm super comfortable with. I'm super happy to talk about my own experience and sort of what I've gone through. And so I shared a little bit and sort of we talked about it. And then something really, really wonderful happened. Everyone on the table, and bear in mind, this is 8 or 9 complete strangers until that night from different companies, from different parts of the world, began to share their own story. And you could almost see that as each person shared, the weight kind of lifted off their shoulders, and the next person would get ready to share. And the anticipation was there, and it was honestly a wonderful evening. And I genuinely believe that we all became closer for talking about this small 20-minute segment of then what ended up being a 5 or 6 hour long night. Now, it's not always going to be that organic though. Perhaps if you feel comfortable sharing, it could be. But something that we used to do a lot at Cause is work with teams on introducing the topic of mental health through workshops. And one of those favorites, or one of my most favorite from those, is this idea of taboo or not taboo. And how this worked is essentially we would create an anonymous safe space in the office. We'd find a wall that was away from people looking at it but still had foot traffic. And ultimately, we'd sort of just like split it in two. On one side of the wall, we had taboo written. On the other side, we had not taboo written. There was a small desk, a big pile of Post-it notes and pens. And the idea here is that people could come along and write their thoughts and feelings and whatever was on their mind and place it on one side of this wall. And the idea here being that inevitably, people are going to relate to things in both sections more often than not. And this really helps to make it feel more secure and okay to be talked about if you know that other people are experiencing the same things that you are. Another great way that we did this was by introducing a series of lunch and learns. A lunch and learn is essentially you grab your lunch, sit together and learn something. And a range of topics here could include things like your company's mental health policy, ways to manage stress and pressure, such as meditation, yoga, breathing exercises, etc., or even bringing in experts on mental health to speak at a session. Ultimately, there are a ton of things that could be done, and honestly, I could probably give a talk on those alone. But generally speaking, the idea should be to allow mental health to be a topic that people are comfortable with at work. That way, we can unlock a stronger sense of empathy with the people that are using our product, which segues really nicely onto my next slide. Stop saying users. This is admittedly a big pet peeve of mine, but I feel like it's an important part of this conversation nonetheless. And I say this because the way in which we talk about our work actually has such a huge impact on the way we approach it. And the commonly used terminology of users is not only ugly and inaccurate, but it adds a layer of separation between you and the people engaging with your products. Using the term users is ultimately a little bit dehumanizing. It reduces that audience to a basic state of existing to use the product, and it neglects the human side. It strips them of their thoughts, their feelings, circumstances, and everything that really makes them human. But of course, we all know this isn't the case. So by stopping saying users and using terminology like people, it really helps us remember that people live a whole life with thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and really allows us to look behind the numbers and really try to understand the impact that we have on their lives. Using the term people just ultimately reminds us that with every decision we make, we are impacting somebody's life in some small way or another. So point number 3 is to be transparent, comprehensible, and clear with your intentions. So recently, we've started to see some really big changes in tech, especially around transparency. For a long time, products acted almost like a black box. You plugged in your information in one side and then out popped the experience on the other. And this is great for things like adoption, reducing friction, following the don't make me think principles, but helping people understand how a system works is actually vital to empowering them to make decisions on how and when they use it. And ultimately being transparent with how your product uses inputs will enhance a feeling of safety and comfortability while reducing stress and anxiety. And this is especially important when things may be different than we expect, or more importantly, different than what people will assume is true. If we take the Amazon Echo, for example, for the majority of people working in tech, the idea that humans may have to review snippets from Alexa's audio is pretty intuitive. For the voice recognition and AI to get better, humans are needed to transcribe the input and train the algorithms, right? Well, what is intuitive for us working in tech and what is intuitive for people engaging with our products can sometimes be two entirely different things. And we've seen this over and over in big tech, where we're not being intentionally deceitful, but we're also not being explicitly transparent, which can lead to headlines like these. So what can we do to be more transparent? The first thing really is to offer control. The Alexa app now lets you see a log of all of the recordings that it has ever taken, but even better than that is it lets you delete them. Transparency and control are really the two cornerstones of trust when it comes to new technology. And it's not enough to be transparent in legalese, gray on gray text, or in the small print. We need to make the effort to make sure that our products and systems are comprehensible. You see, generally speaking, people have the right to understand both what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if you're uncomfortable with exposing either of those things, then there may be some larger questions that should be being asked as well. Taking the time and the effort to make sure that your system is not only transparent, but also understandable at a human level will pay dividends in the future. And the consequences of not doing so could be incredibly costly. Not only could it cause mistrust in your product or company, but it ultimately could generate some pretty severe anxiety for some of the people that are using your experiences. Point number 4 is to value people's time. And now this sounds pretty simple, right? But it's something that products so often ignore. Valuing people's time comes in many shapes and sizes, but ultimately, it comes down to understanding where your product fits within their lives and optimizing for that portion. And in the age of push notifications and endless engagement, this might be the one that people struggle most to accept. But we do need to change the way that we look at our digital experiences. One of my favorite examples of this is Instagram's All Caught Up feature. When we think about Instagram, it's a pretty incredibly powerful platform. It's engaging, it's lightweight, it's seamless, and incredibly well designed. The result is that you could easily spend hours and hours mindlessly scrolling through the feed. I'll be honest, just this week, I've caught myself on several occasions scrolling with no intent nor reason. If you do combine this with that endless scroll nature of social media, you could quite easily have people sinking a ton of time into the platform. Instagram, however, introduced the All Caught Up feature, which is essentially a small feed item that appears and notifies you when you've seen everything new. And this small nudge is exactly the type of thing we need to be doing to encourage healthier digital habits. And we see it happening more and more. Across Apple's Screen Time, YouTube's Take a Break, and Facebook's Your Time on Facebook. One of the reasons that these features work so well is that they're non-judgmental. They don't encourage, nor do they condemn you spending time on your device. Instead, they give you a nudge and help you become more aware so that you can make more intentful decisions around your digital habits. And that's where this idea of ethics and accountability come in. For products that add value or are functional, we should be looking to exist in our quadrant and make it a kick-ass quadrant. People should return to the product because they find genuine value in it, not because we've gotten them hooked. And it's at this point I generally get the question, but wait, isn't that harder to achieve? Yes, it is. But that's good design. And it isn't easy. And if it was, everybody would do it. All of the above companies could have hid behind those great metrics, but instead they probably cut their usage and they reassigned what's really important because it's the right thing to do. This one almost starts to feel a little weird to justify, but the culture we're in almost makes it necessary for us to actively dismantle this way of thinking. It's not something we can ignore, or it will keep happening. And a big part of valuing people's time is point number 5, providing a good exit experience, and understanding that your product might not be the right fit for them forever. And when the time comes to part ways, we should do so amicably. Now, I could draw comparisons to a rough breakup with an overzealous partner, or I could paint an image of a digital hostage being held against their will, but I don't think I need to. At its core, an exit experience should really be 3 things. It should be easy to find. While the delete account button shouldn't necessarily be front and center, it should be easy and intuitive to find and definitely not intentionally hidden. It should be transparent and understandable. What happens when somebody deletes their account? Are you going to keep their data? Are you going to contact them in the future? Are they liable for anything? Are they still signed up to a subscription? How can they cancel? Can people still find them? Providing as much information here as possible will provide comfort and understanding. Which leads to the next bit. It should really just be comforting. Don't abuse people's emotions. It's gross. Part ways amicably and make the experience as safe and as simple as signing up. Failing to do the above, or even worse, creating an opposite experience, will at best be wildly annoying for the people that leave your service. But for people with poor mental health or mental illness, or people who have experienced a bad experience on your platform, it can have a large impact on anxiety levels, amongst other things. The headline for this one is really, don't be icky. So as a bit of a recap, these are probably 5 of the most important things you can keep in mind when working on your product to provide a solid basis. But I picked them out because these are the most common areas that I've seen companies and products stumble in the past. But it is far from an exhaustive list. Designing for mental health at its core really isn't anything special. It's about dismantling some of the dark patterns that the tech industry has built up as norms. It's about considering that the person behind the screen lives an entire life away from your product and respecting that small segment that they've allowed you access to. But most of all, it's about being human, because we all have mental health. Designing for mental health isn't just about designing for the 1 in 4 people using your product that do suffer from mental illness. It's about ensuring that everybody on your platform has that same good experience. And the product decisions that we make today could have impacts that ripple well into the future. It's so easy for us to get lost in the metrics, the numbers, the profits, the bonus, and to forget the impact that we can have on real people's lives, both the positive and the negative. Working in tech, especially consumer-facing tech, we have a huge responsibility to fight for what is right, both morally and ethically. So whether you're a PM, a designer, an engineer, or a consumer, we can really speak up for what is right throughout the product design process. And so if there is one thing, if anything, that I would really love for you to take away from this talk, it's that we all have that power to bring mindful design to our companies, our products, and our industries. Because technology is not just something that happens. It's something that we all create. So when we go to work tomorrow, let's choose to create products that ultimately we're really proud to stand behind. And if there is one more thing that I would like you to take away, because we're at the end of the slot and I would love to continue this conversation, it's my Twitter handle. And also feel free to message me in the Slack and leave questions there. Because there aren't any clear-cut or easy answers to these problems that we see. but it is so important that we talk about this subject if we ever hope to steer the ship in the right direction. So I would really love to hear your thoughts on anything that we've covered, and I'm always around to chat: design, mental health, houseplants, or otherwise. Thank you so much.